Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Happy Janmashtami.
Jai.
So, the idea was that here, as the conclusion of the program before the midnight Arctic, I was asked, or I suggested, to give a presentation about the reality of Lord Krishna, actually. And it'll actually be a slide and PowerPoint presentation. So is everyone able to see up here on the wall? Otherwise I think you have to move, if possible. You can move over here. And I think we also need the lights turned off, at least most of the lights. Can someone turn off the lights? It's out in the hallway. That's Taylor Street. The lights up here should be turned off, please. So, how's that? I mean, is everyone? Because I think someone in the corner over here cannot see. Or can everyone see? Yes. Okay. Okay. So, well, actually, I can say this is little of an experiment. I hope it's going to be, a a successful experiment. Actually, it's a presentation that I already did once a few weeks ago at Almik Score, and they were basically happy with it. But also they could see, and you'll also see, I've been trying to develop it a little more. But it's not a complete professional presentation. It's not. I mean, all arguments are not being answered. I'm not claiming to be an expert in this field, but it's just something that I think is quite kind of fascinating, and I hope you'll also find it fascinating. So, let's see. Yes. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So, actually, the presentation is called something apparently as irrelevant. Okay. Any better here, yeah? Yeah, that's not good. That's actually much better. Something that might sound as irrelevant as searching for evidence of a worldwide Vedic culture in prehistorical times. So maybe that sounds a little dry. So, but I can assure you it's a very, very relevant topic. Because here we are tonight celebrating Lord Krishna's Appearance Day. And I hope we are all convinced that actually Lord Krishna did exist. You know, he was living on this planet 5,000 years ago, and there was many of the events that are described about his life. They actually, or not many, but all the events that are described about his life in the Mahabharata and in the Srimad Bhagavatam and all Vedic literatures actually did take place. They were actually historical events. However, many do not share this understanding that we have, and actually many will claim that actually it's Krishna is a mythological figure. The idea that there was previously in what most people say this was just a primitive Stone Age. There was no worldwide Vedic culture at that time. It's simply mythology. So you can have your mythology in peace, but actually there's no connection with reality. So, and Krishna actually is just a mythological figure. So what to say about that? Because it's a widespread idea. For example, even here we have famous Mahatma Gandhi, who wrote in his he wrote 2 commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, and here he writes, generally Mahabharata is taken to be historical work, but in my opinion it is not so. I cannot say that Ramayana and Mahabharata are historical works. They are simply religious works. If you are still inclined to treat them as historical works, then I should say that they are nothing but the history of the self, Atma. They do not contain what happened thousands of years ago. And Gandhi also wrote, Krishna of the Gita is the embodiment of pure and divine knowledge, but without having any physical existence. But this, the avatar Krishna, is not denied at all, but only it is said that he is mythical. So much for the Mahatma. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mahatmanas tumam parata. And Gandhi, I mean, at least did not measure up to that, it looks like. So, but Gandhi is not alone. I just found another quote from an Indian Nobel laureate who said in 2001 at a conference of history that Ramayana and Mahabharata do not have any historical value. These 2 epics are simply mythology and nothing but poets' fantasy. Neither Ram nor Krishna was his historical personality, and both of them were simply mythical. So this is what I'm I want to have a look at, and I'm still, actually, this presentation is part of my trying to look more into it. Again, I'm not an expert, professional historian. I'm not willing, I'm not able to actually face him and like that. So, but it's a kind of topic in which I'm curious, and I hope also to give you some idea that it's not that clear cut and black and white. There actually are reasons to think that the present historical understanding is radically wrong, and actually there was a Vedic culture, worldwide Vedic culture, and the personalities described in the Vedic scriptures actually were real historical personalities. So it's actually a huge topic. Many are writing an awful lot about it. I'm simply scratching the top of a surface of an iceberg. And you can find out that, there's so many things I'm not mentioning, but I hope it'll give you like an idea of what's going on. Let's first have a look. Many of you may already be familiar with this Saraswati, the lost river. Saraswati is a very prominent, it's actually the main river in much of the Vedic literature. Much what takes place is described to take place in the river Saraswati. And it was for many years, and also that, for example, Europeans, when they were criticizing the Vedic literatures, they were claiming, these Vedic scriptures are completely mythological. They contain, all kinds of geographical locations, such as river Saraswati, which does not exist, so therefore it is completely mythological. Now, of course, this has somewhat changed, because in the 90s, satellites were surveying Indian subcontinent, and they actually discovered that there was once a huge river, a vast river, flowing down from the Himalayas and down through central India and into the Arabian Sea. Here we have a map of India, and here we have a prediction of where approximately the Saraswati was flowing from here, from Saraswati, and from Himalayas, and then down, and then running into the ocean north of Dwarka. And here more details, same map. We have here the Sindhu or the Indus, and the Saraswati, and Trishavati, and then we have Yamuna and Ganga running, eastwards. So that looks like they've now found actually there was a mighty Saraswati. And what's interesting is that previously historians were talking about the Indus culture, but now actually they have discovered that it was the Indus-Saraswati culture, and the archaeological locations found where actually there are many more archaeological locations found on the Saraswati, the dried riverbeds of Saraswati, than on the Indus. So actually for this, the Indus culture was actually the center, was actually the Saraswati. And the discovery of Saraswati seems to completely debunk what is called the Aryan invasion theory. If you're a little familiar with standard Indian history, you'll know that that India's culture in the antique, which was one of the first on this planet, but actually it did not even come from India, and the Aryans did not come from India. They came from a place somewhere out in Russia and even Europe. Actually, the basis for this whole idea about the Aryan invasion was that in the 1700s, the Europeans discovered that actually Sanskrit and Latin and Greek and other European languages are very closely related. They belong to the same family of languages, and therefore they adopted the Indo-European languages. So they belong to the same family. That means at one point there must have been one people common people to all of us which spoke a common language, and we have all emanated from there. Where do the original Aryans come from? The first Europeans actually thought it must come from India because Sanskrit is the oldest language, so it must all come from India. But pretty soon that became not acceptable to the Europeans because here, we are, the superior race which has conquered the rest of the world. And not only have we conquered the rest of the world, but Europeans are also, in terms of intelligence and so on, superior to other races. So clearly we cannot have originated from India. And thus the idea of the Aryan invasion theory arose, that actually the original Aryans came from Europe and they brought civilization to the rest of the world, including India. And that's called the Aryan invasion theory. It was based completely on comparison of language. There was no archaeological evidence for such an invasion or for such a people somewhere in Europe or somewhere in central Russia or Asia. But it still became the standard theory. And the idea was that the Aryans brought civilization to India. Then at one point in the beginning of the 20th century, the first sites of the Indus culture was found, called Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And they were actually dated before the Aryan invasion, which according to the standard theory had taken place something like 1500 BC or something like that. 2000 BC approximately. But suddenly you had an advanced culture that was definitely older than that. From that point on, the Aryans were reduced to primitive tribes that had roamed all over and also overrun India and conquered India. And that became the standard Aryan invasion theory of the 20th century. The Aryans only brought two things to India. They brought their language, Sanskrit, and they brought the caste system, the despicable caste system. These were the two things they brought. And the rest they just took over. And then something like 500 years after their invasion, they started writing down the Vedas over a long period of, thousands of years. First the Rig Veda and so on. And however, with the discovery of Saraswati, this whole Aryan invasion theory seems highly questionable, because it turns out that Saraswati was dry 4000 BC, and you have to go at least like 4,000 years ago, like 2,000 years ago, it was definitely completely dry, and you have to go at least to 4,000 and 5,000 and 6,000 to BC when it was flowing at its mightiest. So that means, since the Vedas are containing lots of description of the river Saraswati, it's hard to imagine how some invading tribes coming to India 2,000 years after the river dried out are writing fantastic description of this mighty river flowing. So suddenly, this discovery of the river completely debunks the Aryan invasion theory, which also has many, many problems. So the argument that Vedas were mythological because the river Saraswati does not exist has been turned out to be it's not correct. So there are good reasons to think that these descriptions of Saraswati are correct, and also that actually the Vedas were written at a time when the Saraswati was flowing. So, and there's a lot of, there's whole books being written on that, about Saraswati River and the Vedic civilization, like that. Many Indian scholars are writing these days. Next, let's have a look at Buddha, Lord Buddha, who appears 1563 BC and died in 483 BC according to standard history. And Buddha's date is actually very significant. It's considered the marker of history and prehistory. Prehistory means from history, from when historical times on. Then we have actually written. We have scriptures. We have writings documenting history. Before that, we do not have any sure scriptural evidence. And Buddha is considered, from Buddha on, we are in historical times. Before Buddha, it's prehistory. And here, of course, it's interesting to notice also that the Vedas considered prehistory because we do not know when they were written. And in particular, also, it's, for example, all the dynasties mentioned in the Vedas are completely off. You can go on in the Mahabharata and Bhagavatam. There are dynasties, chronologies of kings, this king and this king and this king, but their dates are, they're clearly completely off because they do not match with this date of the Buddha, who lived something like 500 BC. And this date, actually, it could be questions. Where is this date actually come from? Where is it derived from? It turns out it was actually dated by William Jones, the first great Indologist, who dated Buddha actually on the basis of Alexander the Great, who invaded India. And Alexander, he lived from 356 to 323 BC. That date is very completely sure. And when Alexander conquered India, or invaded India, he was stopped by Chandragupta, or as the Greek records call him, Sandrakotus, Chandragupta. And then William Jones concluded that this Chandragupta means Chandragupta Maurya. He's very famous. He was the prince that was raised by Chanakya and who drove out Maharaj King Nanda. And he's actually he's in the line. Buddha comes in the line of Chandragupta Maurya. I think he's the third descendant in the line, third or fourth descendant in the line of Chandragupta Maurya. So then from it's the other way around. Buddha is 3 generations before Chandragupta Maurya. And so then according to this date, Chandragupta Maurya and Buddha, then he establishes the date of Buddha from that. That's actually where the date comes from Alexander's invasion of India. Now, that sounds all very nice, but the point is there is more than one Chandragupta. There's more than one Chandragupta. And there are reasons to think William Jones got the wrong Chandragupta. So the question is, which Chandragupta? There are 2 very prominent Chandraguptas, Chandragupta Maurya and Chandragupta Gupta. And Chandragupta was somewhat later than Chandragupta Maurya. According to the Greek records, no, not the Greek records, but it's known that the Chandragupta Maurya was preceded by Mahapadmananda and succeeded by Bindusar. Mahapadmananda was the one that Chandragupta expelled, and his son was Bindusar. And Chandragupta Gupta was preceded by Chandrasri and succeeded by Samudragupta. Now the Greek records, according to the Greek records, Sandrakotus or Chandragupta was preceded by Sandramas and succeeded by Sandrakyptus. And if we actually look at the names, first Chandrasri and Chandramas, quite similar, but had nothing to do with Mahapadmananda. or succeeded by, again, Janmashtami, and which in the Greek name is Janmashtami, which doesn't resemble anything like Bindusar, but it's phonetically close to Janmashtami. So nowadays there are actually many who are claiming, and also there are other evidence. Actually, in one sense, the traditional evidence. Traditionally, Buddha is earlier, and there's much more. So now, actually, many are claiming Buddha was wrongly dated, and actually he lived. This is a real date of Buddha according to many. 1807 BC until 1727 BC. If that's correct, then it becomes very interesting, because then actually, first of all, the chronology is mentioned in the Mahabharata and in the Srimad Bhagavatam suddenly fall into place. That means they come into the purview of historical times. That means actually it looks like the chronologies actually are correct. That's one point. Another point is that actually a lot of Indian history is completely off if this is correct. For instance, Shankara, standard theory is that Shankara lived something like 600 or 800 BC. No, sorry, 800 after Christ. Quite recently. Interesting that does not tally with the traditional records, which claim that actually came before. And Shankara is actually also dated on the basis of the date of Buddha. So this is correct. That means actually Shankara was also living something like 600 BC. This also makes an awful lot more sense, because the India that Alexander conquered or met was a Hindu India. It was not a Buddhist India. So that indicates actually Shankara must have been there before Alexander coming to India, because Buddhism was driven out already from India at that time. So anyway, that has a lot of complications if the date of Buddha is wrong. And many, scholars are saying it could be completely wrong. This is of course very, very radical. Next. Oh, yeah. I was looking at that. I was looking at stones actually. Actually, I was one day. I phoned to a company, a Roskilde company, which was renting cranes, for lifting, and I spoke with a lady at the reception and said that I have I need to have moved one, a rock stone, 800 tons, 1 kilometer, and then lifted up 6 meters above the ground. Can you do that? And she said that we can do that. We can do it over, several times. And told no, it has to be moved in one piece. And say, my goodness, she said, I think we need some cranes. We don't have cranes in Denmark like that. We need to get some cranes from abroad. By the way, where is that stone? Where's that rock? And I said, something like 75 kilometers northeast of Beirut in Lebanon. And they said, you go. And then I told her, actually, I was somewhat joking, but I was also actually serious, because I was writing about some amazing stones found in Lebanon. I said they're the biggest megalithes found anywhere in the world. All over the world we find these enormous, several hundred tons of stones having been carved out and moved and lifted in the thousands of years ago, and really no one knows how they did it. And the biggest are found in Lebanon, in a place called Baalbek, which later on became a Roman temple for Apollo, but Apollo temple was built on a foundation from a previous structure that goes back, no one knows how old it is actually. Here are some of these, here are the 3 big stones. They each weigh 800 tons. And they're 6 meters above the ground. They have been transported 1 kilometer.